The fluids in your body are composed of water and dissolved substances, including electrolytes, which are crucial for body function. Your goals for learning are to list the general functions and importance of water and electrolytes in the body, to identify the fluid compartments and the relative concentrations of electrolytes within those fluid spaces. Here's what you need to know: the definition of osmosis, membrane transport mechanisms. To see definitions of terms, click the bold red words. We ingest water and electrolytes through the gastrointestinal tract. To see the movement of fluids through the gastrointestinal tract, drag the glass of water to the figure's mouth. Fluids are absorbed into the plasma in the intestine. The fluids circulate within the plasma, bathing the cells in the body. The kidneys remove excess ions and water from the body through the urine, although water is also lost at other sites. Water performs several important functions in the body. Water helps maintain body temperature. When water vaporizes off the skin, it takes large quantities of heat with it. This process cools the body temperature down. Because water has a high heat capacity, it can absorb and release large quantities of heat before significantly changing temperature. Our bodies are composed of 50 to 70% water, and that large percentage of water holds heat in the body and helps prevent fluctuation in body temperature. Water acts as a protective cushion in amniotic fluid and cerebrospinal fluid. Water is the reactant for hydrolysis reactions that occur in the body. Click the water molecule to start this process. Starch is hydrolyzed in the mouth by the enzyme salivary amylase. With the help of this enzyme, water molecules are added to the bonds between the glucose units in the starch, hydrolyzing the starch to glucose. Note that water can also be formed during some chemical reactions in the body, such as the reactions that produce metabolic water, which will be discussed in Topic 2. Water acts as a solvent to dissolve molecules and ions in the body. For example, if you eat a salty pretzel, the water in your saliva will dissolve the salt. Click a water molecule to see this process. Water is a polar molecule. When water dissolves ions, the partial negative charge on the oxygen attracts positive ions, such as sodium, and the partial positive charge on the hydrogen attracts negative ions, such as chloride. Except for the salts deposited in bone and teeth, most other ions in the body are dissolved because of water's ability to act as a solvent. Water within cells is an important solvent. It dissolves many of the proteins and other solutes. We are now looking at a blood vessel. Because of water's ability to dissolve ions and molecules within the body fluids, water functions as a medium for the delivery of nutrients and the removal of wastes from the cells through the plasma. The percentage of water in a person depends on the amount of fat tissue, which is only about 20% water compared to lean body mass or muscle mass, which is about 65% water. Click each of these people to determine the approximate percentage of water in their bodies. A healthy young man who is muscular and does not have a lot of fat in his body is about 60% water. Newborns have the highest percentage of water in their bodies. A healthy young woman naturally has more fat and less muscle than a man and is about 50% water. The more fat a person has in his or her body, the less water is present. Older people tend to have less lean body mass and therefore contain less water. Water, along with its dissolved solutes, occupies three main compartments within the body. Intracellular fluid is the fluid within cells. It is also known as cytosol. Extracellular fluid is the fluid found outside of cells. There are two major kinds of extracellular fluid. Interstitial fluid is the fluid surrounding the cells. Plasma is the fluid component of the blood. Let's consider a 70-kilogram man. 60% of his weight, or approximately 40 liters, is fluid. Approximately 62% of the body's fluid is intracellular. Click the intracellular compartment to see the level of fluid this represents. Approximately 40% of the body's fluid is interstitial. Click the interstitial compartment to see the level of fluid this represents. Approximately 8% of the body's fluid is blood plasma. Click the plasma to see the level of fluid this represents. You are looking at plasma, a typical body fluid. The term body fluid refers to the water in the body and all of the dissolved substances, which are also known as solutes. Since the water dissolves the solutes, it is the solvent. A typical body fluid contains electrolytes, also known as ions. Proteins are considered to be colloids when dispersed in body fluids. Compared to simple ions, proteins are huge molecules. Because they bear a negative charge, we will consider them to be electrolytes. Non-electrolytes are uncharged molecules found in body fluids. Glucose is an example of a non-electrolyte. Blood cells do not dissolve in water. They are suspended particles and are not considered to be a part of the body fluid. Electrolytes are charged particles or ions that are dissolved in body fluids. The major positive ions or cations in body fluids are sodium ion, potassium ion, calcium ion, and magnesium ion. The major negative ions or anions in body fluids are chloride ion, bicarbonate ion, phosphate ions, sulfate ion, anions of organic acids such as lactate, and proteins. Each fluid compartment needs just the right types and levels of electrolytes for proper functioning of neurons, muscle cells, and other cells in the body. The electrolyte composition of extracellular fluids and intracellular fluids have significant differences. Filling in the pie graph will help illustrate these differences. Drag the major extracellular positive ion to its proper place on the extracellular pie chart. Extracellular fluid also contains other positive ions, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. Drag the major intracellular positive ion to its proper place on the pie chart. Intracellular fluid also contains other positive ions, sodium, and magnesium. Drag the major extracellular negative ion to its proper place on the extracellular pie chart. Other negative ions found in the extracellular fluid are protein, bicarbonate, phosphates, organic acids, and sulfate. Drag the two major intracellular negative ions to their proper places on the pie chart. Other negative ions found in the intracellular fluid are bicarbonate, chloride, and sulfate. The composition of interstitial fluid is almost identical to that of plasma, except for one negative electrolyte. Click that electrolyte. Sorry, try again. Sorry, try again. Count the number of positive and negative ions, or particles, in this sample of intracellular fluid. Are the number of positive ions equal? Now let's look at a few of the many important functions that electrolytes perform in the body. Electrolytes serve as cofactors for enzymes. A very important reaction in the body occurs when carbon dioxide and water form carbonic acid. We can speed up this reaction with the enzyme carbonic anhydrase. Cofactors are non-protein substances that act, along with enzymes, to speed up reactions in the body. Calcium, magnesium, and other cations, such as zinc, can serve as cofactors for enzymes. Zinc is a cofactor for this enzyme. Click the zinc to add it to the enzyme. Electrolytes in the form of sodium and potassium ions also contribute to membrane potential in all cells and are responsible for action potentials in neuron and muscle cells. Click the axon to see this action. Calcium ions are important electrolytes because they are involved in the secretion and action of hormones and neurotransmitters. Click the synaptic end bulb to see how this process works. Calcium is also involved in the contraction of muscles, including the heart. Click the terminal cisternae to see this effect. Some electrolytes, such as bicarbonate, phosphate, and protein, help maintain acid-base balance. This process will be illustrated in Topic 4. By pumping sodium out the cell, the sodium-potassium pump uses ATP to keep the concentration of sodium low inside cells. During secondary active transport, some transport proteins will allow sodium to diffuse from areas of high to low concentration and drag with it a molecule or another ion, such as glucose seen here, from an area of lower to higher concentration. Glucose enters the proximal convoluted tubule cells of the kidney tubules and the intestine by secondary active transport. Let's take a closer look at what happens during osmosis. Osmosis is the movement of water across a membrane from the side that has more water, and therefore less solute, to the side that has less water, and therefore more solute. When there are equal amounts of water particles on either side of the membrane, water can move freely back and forth across the membrane in both directions at the same rate. We say that the two solutions are isotonic, meaning that they have the same total concentration of solute particles. Let's see what happens when more solute particles are added to the right side of the container. Click the beaker to add the solute. Now more solute is present on the right side, and it is hypertonic compared to the left side. Because less solute is present on the left side, we say that solution is hypotonic compared to the right side. Note that if you increase the concentration of solute, you decrease the concentration of water. Water still moves freely across the membrane in both directions. However, less water will move from right to left because the higher concentration of water on the left side creates a greater chance for a collision between a water molecule and a channel on the left side. As a result, more water will move from the left to the right side of the container. Let's see how osmosis affects real cells. Move the needle on the meter to see the effective solutions of different tonicity on cells. In a hypotonic solution, water moves into cells and they expand. We measure the ability of a solution to cause osmosis in terms of osmotic pressure, which is expressed in millimeters of mercury, a unit of pressure. The definition of osmotic pressure is the external pressure applied to the top of the fluid to prevent osmosis from occurring. The greater the number of solute particles dissolved in solution, the higher the osmotic pressure. To find out more about colloid osmotic pressure, click here. Here we see a patient ready to receive an intravenous solution. Normally patients are given an isotonic IV solution. In this patient, the hypertonic and hypotonic IVs are contraindicated. Let's see what happens to this patient's blood cells when each IV is given. Click each IV bag to see what happens. If we put a red blood cell in a hypotonic solution, what will happen to it? Remember that osmosis will occur if a cell is placed in a solution that has a lower solute concentration. Correct. The cell will expand. If too much water enters the cell, it could eventually undergo hemolysis or break open. When a cell is placed in a more dilute, if we put a red blood cell in an isotonic solution, what will happen to it? If the solution is isotonic to the solution inside the red blood cell, then there should be no net movement in or out of the cell, and the volume of the cell should remain constant. If the solution is isotonic to the solution inside the red blood cell, then there should be no net movement in or out of the cell, and the volume of the cell should remain constant. Correct. The volume of the red blood cell will remain constant because the solute concentrations are equal on both sides of the membrane. If we put a red blood cell in a hypertonic solution, what will happen to it? Correct. The cell will shrink or crenate because more water hits water channels in the membrane on the inside of the cell than on the outside of the cell. There is a net flow of water out of the cell that causes the cell to shrink. This is why hypertonic IV solutions are only used in specific clinical situations. Here's a summary of what we've covered. Fluids are composed of water and all the substances or solutes dissolved in the water in the body. Most fluids within the body exist in three major compartments: intracellular, plasma, and interstitial. The interstitial compartment and the plasma are the extracellular compartments. Within a solution, positive and negative charges must balance regardless of the number of ions present. The concentration of dissolved ions, or electrolytes, in the intracellular compartment is very different than the concentration of electrolytes in the extracellular compartment. Both water and electrolytes have many important functions in the body. Osmosis is the movement of water across a membrane from the side that has more water to the side that has less water. To test your knowledge, click the quiz button to go to the self-quiz.